So the first question, how do you envision fulfilling your role as chief pastor to the clergy of this diocese? What would that pastoral support look like? How would you encourage the clergy to come to you?
Okay, great question. Thank you. I don't need that. Thank you very much. So, what I would bring to this position of bishop, if elected, is 27 years in ordained leadership. So, just to put it in numbers, that's 27 years of Easter sermons, 27 years of Christmas Eve sermons, 27 years of stewardship programs. Also having that unfortunate incident where somebody will come up to you at the moment of culmination of a project that you've been working super hard on and will say the one thing to deflate that effort and completely undermine everything that's going on. That's what happens in community. And the gift of that moment, of course, is that they remind you that this is about Jesus and not about yourself. So it's all good, as they say. So part of what I would bring is the experience, the understanding, the lived experience of being in ministry. And I would hope clergy would know that I have more than walked in their shoes. I've been in smaller situations in ministry, larger situations in ministry. Everyone is trying their hardest to do this very, very difficult work of this. What I would want to say to the clergy who are here, my first instinct and second and third instinct is to love you, period. You're doing an incredible job, and just to know I completely believe in what you're doing in your local ministry context. The next thing I would do is really try to explore with you if there was an issue that was going on for them in terms of their ministry, what exactly was going on, and so we could discover that together. My approach would be to say, hey, what's the invitation of the Spirit here? That it's not just about the problem, but there's a deeper spiritual work that's going on. And then to put that, after we've named that, to put that in the larger context of the diocese, to say the work that you're doing in your local community around this particular issue is not just for your community or for you yourself, it actually is for the whole diocese. And so is there a way that we could benefit from the work that you are doing yourself? Quite often, after a pastor's been there for a while, their congregations will begin to mirror their personality. And so if there is a situation that's coming up, there's a good chance that that congregation and the leader need to take that path together to strengthen whatever that weak muscle is or whatever that might be. My style is very about vulnerable leadership. I share it from my own experience. I hope that engenders trust so people know that they can approach me with any question that they might have. Last thing I just want to say is that as we work in ministry and try to bring change to our communities, that change is often difficult and often rocky. Ed Friedman tells a story about change in systems, and he equates it to breaking the sound barrier. So those test pilots in the early 60s would approach the sound barrier, and the plane would start to rattle and roll, and they would have all these sort of inventions about the devil lives on the other side. It's unnatural for us to go to this fast. But Chuck Yeager just pushed through, and what happened on the other side was absolute peace. And so what does it mean to be your bishop and to encourage you and your courage to go through that sound barrier, to find that new homeostasis on the other side? To say it's really going to shake, rattle, and roll, and it's going to feel like the whole system is coming apart, right? But then at that moment, you're free to change. So it actually is a gift. And I don't want clergy to do that in isolation.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. What do you think of the current strategic plan for the diocese? How would you see yourself leading the collaborative effort to continue to renew this plan? And do you have a vision for where God might be calling ECR next?
Great question. Yes. So love our strategic plan. I love the vision, resilient and dynamic gospel presence in a rapidly changing world. It's awesome. I love our 5 strategic values: Christ-centeredness, passion, integrity, innovation, and reconciliation. There it is. All right. So, but all those are great. My point, though, is how do we inhabit that? Like, how do they guide our decision making? How do they inform our ministry? How do they encourage us? How do they deepen our sense of what God's called us to do and our relationship with the Spirit in our midst? So what I would love to do is I would love to gather lay leaders and clergy together. Maybe it's using the clericus meeting structure to say, clergy, help me understand how this strikes you. What's happening in your local congregation? Like, how are you a resilient and dynamic gospel presence in a rapidly changing? What are the stories that make that real for you? What I do at St. Andrews is I share a weekly video message. So I love to get on and just tape a three-minute message just to say, hey, here's what I'm thinking about for the upcoming Sunday. As bishop, I would want to share with the wider diocese what I'm learning in those stories as we're learning about how this manifests itself in the life of our diocese, so that everybody from all corners of the diocese is brought into this common conversation and we begin to understand ourselves from a lived reality. It's really important in doing this work that we all feel like we have a contribution to make and that we are gaining the wisdom from every single corner of our diocese. So that's going to take some time, but as you continue to share that story, it becomes clear, and then something, and it's happened in other communities, happened at St. Andrews, it just clicks, and you know this is who we are for this time. Then everyone knows, here's how I belong in that structure. Here's how I belong in that story. I have now found my place, as I said earlier, in God's unfolding story, right? And I know where the Spirit is calling me in my particular role, my community's particular role. So I see using that kind of structure, communication, feedback, telling stories, learning from one another as a way for us to really live into that strategic plan.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. The next question. Jail ministry and re-entry into society is an important ministry, not only in ECR, but also in the Episcopal Church. What does all are welcome mean to you with regard to the incarcerated and those in re-entry from jail or prison? Does your answer change if they are a sexual offender or if their crime was violent? Please explain.
Great question, and a real question for us. So at St. Andrews, we have lots of different manifestations of jail ministry. We are very active in our local jail. We have had a 30, 40-year history of being active. Currently, we run 2 services on Sunday. We run a 3rd service at Grace downtown, where those who are coming out of custody can gather for worship. It's in a space that's proximate to them. We also run 2 EFM programs. In addition to that, we have a retreat program called Art and Spirit, which talks about using art to get at some of the deeper reality and some of the blockages and barriers that we have to living a fuller life. So using art to kind of get at some of those inner wisdom pieces that may be hidden. So all this is to say is that we are extremely active in this. St. Andrews is dealing with this very issue right now. So it is something that we have had a lot of conversation about. When we were welcoming those in custody, we saw some fantastic organic expressions of ministry where individuals would pair up because they're in recovery too. Suddenly they're meeting up and mentoring these men on a one-to-one basis, on a regular basis. And that was just beautiful to see that kind of organic energy that was there. Since we have had to tackle the question of sex offender, we have had to slow down the process and to put some parameters around that. We have a school in place, so that creates its own additional hurdles to cover with that. So what we've done is we've worked with those who are in jail ministry, which is about 30 people, very passionate about that. We've had our vestry together. We've had common conversations about how important it is from a value standpoint for us to be able to say at the Eucharist, when we break the bread, that truly all are welcome. And we are working our way through that question. Our default right now is to use the legal system, so whatever restrictions that a parolee has by the parole officer is keeping us, we're respecting that. In other words, we will respect whatever parameters are set by those that they are dealing with after jail. But it is something that we are living into. And I do want to say that this has been a hard issue for our community because there's so much passion around it. So what I've done is I stretched it out. I said, look, we're going to do this in 3 stages. We're going to talk about this as a listening phase. We're going to talk about this as a discernment phase. And we're going to talk about this in decision phase. So listening is about sharing our experience and really stretching it out so we can hear from one another what it means to live into this very difficult moment, right? And to hear why this is important and why we are called from an identity standpoint to say all are welcome. Second, when we do discernment, what investigations do we need to know? What other schools in the Episcopal Church are welcoming those who are sex offenders onto their property? What parameters do they put with that? And lastly is the decision. So that's the policy and procedures that we're currently putting in place. The reason for doing it in 3 stages is my last comment about that is that time leads to transformation. If you make it a binary decision, yes or no, from the very beginning, no one has an opportunity to be able to live into this difficult moment, right? And to feel like our relationships as a community are going to be above the issue itself. We're going to hold ourselves together into this hard moment. So I'm proud of what we've been able to do because it's real. It's real. We are doing it. We're really living this out. And I'm proud and excited about what the Spirit's doing there.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, our next question. What would you do to increase understanding of the call to ordination, and that is priestly or diaconal, and to help local congregations discern vocations among them? Should there be an age limit in place regarding ordination to the priesthood or the vocational diaconate?
Well, there is an age piece in place. You removing it?
I don't think we're referring, or the person who wrote this question is referring to the maximum age of 72 when you must retire. I think that as I would interpret this, is there an age limit to move into the process for ordination?
Okay. Well, yes. Okay, so I think we understand priesthood pretty well in the diocese. And unfortunately, our church has defined everything else around that order of priesthood. So a bishop is a super priest, a deacon is a sub-priest. And it's just wrong. We're 4 orders of ministry, 4 distinct orders of ministry. I think the most misunderstood order of ministry is the diaconate. I will say this, and you'll see me live into this, is that to become the church that does not yet exist, we need to hold up the role of the deacons as our model. And that is because deacons embody the humility and servant ministry of Jesus, and they're willing to dwell in the needs of the world. And if you've ever been around somebody who's in pain or discomfort, it makes you anxious. So you have to bring your own self-awareness to what I'm feeling in order to be present to somebody else in a caring and compassionate way. To me, that's exactly what the church needs to be doing. So I would say deacons, deacons, deacons as a diocese. Let's live into their model. And I'd like to lift them up. Hopefully in doing that, that would encourage others to join them. Secondly, I know that there are barriers to the ordination process. There's barriers around education and what we require. There's barriers around time. So those who, as Janine was saying, are not available because of their work circumstances, or not available because they don't have the same educational background, but have gifts for this ministry, I would say, is there a way that we can release those gifts so that the church would benefit? And I think we need to have those conversations. That may be a much larger conversation than as a diocese. It may be a general convention conversation, I'm not sure. But we're living in a different reality right now, and I think to honor the Spirit and what the Spirit is doing, we really need to be good stewards of the gifts that are coming to us. So I would approach it in that particular way. I love to go to kids and just say, ask them the baptismal question, which I think is fundamental to what we are asking at the heart of our lives. What am I here to do? What's the purpose that God's called me to do? And that's maybe ordination. That may be just living into my baptismal vows and exercising this particular ministry or this particular ministry in the church. So I think if we're all seeking the answer to that question in the fellowship and encouragement of the community, then we're doing a lot to increase those who are coming to ordination.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
What are your plans for effectively communicating with the diocese should you be elected? How will we come to know you? What mechanisms would you use for allowing your voice to be heard around the diocese?
Well, my understanding is that when we began as a diocese, that we really envisioned a missionary bishop. And we have had a very healthy bishop in Bishop Mary, which has just been awesome. So from this place of health, I would love to be out and about in the diocese, being the bishop in all areas of it. So I would say that first and foremost. So I hope people have contact with me. I think we have good amount of that going on right now. I know in any kind of system or discernment work, communicate. So the weekly video I was talking about, I would love to continue to do that. By the way, if anyone's curious about it, I'm not saying I'm good at it. I really am not. In fact, I probably will encourage others to do it because it's not necessarily great, this little weekly video I do. But it just is about getting out there with your thoughts and really sharing what's on your heart and your mind as you do that. So that's another way in which I would want to communicate and share in the life of the diocese. I don't know what else to say about communication regarding that. So it would be on the forefront of what I would want to do in terms of leadership.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And our last planned question: how would you engage, inspire, and lead the laity in ECR towards living more fully into the Baptismal Covenant?
Well, you had that question, what's God calling me to do? And I think that's central to all of us. At St. Andrews, we have a shared leadership structure that we've put together. And so we've grouped our 70 different ministries in 6 different buckets. Each of those are headed by a lay leader. The purpose of that is administrative, so we pull like-minded ministries together so we can deepen our understanding of that particular ministry area in the congregation. But also it's there to share our stories and support one another. So, I think so often in the church we have people raise their hands and we task them and we say, hey, thanks for doing this, and we never talk with them again. And then until they say, I'm ready to turn over this position, right? I think it's really important for us to be in relationship and community in ministry. So what I would want to do is I would want to find ways in which we can continue to celebrate and share the different ministries that are going on the same way we do that at St. Andrews. There is important work that happens when we come together in like-minded areas. So let me give you an example. We can create, through technology very easily, those who are involved in, it's a chaplaincy program, or maybe it's jail ministry, that they get together every quarter and they share the stories that they're dealing with, the problems, the barriers for their ministry. And so through these relationships, they find themselves being supported. I'm not in isolation anymore. I'm talking with somebody who absolutely understands what I'm doing. If we can form those kind of common interest ministry areas, I think we can really encourage the lay expression of that baptismal question that we have. Also, I think, we're all about stories these days. I mean, what's really going to bring credibility to our witness in the world in sharing Christ's love with others is to share our story. And so I would want to really model that as bishop. As I did today, here's where my beginning was. Here's the story of my family. What's going on for you in your family? How does this get manifested for you? What's your prayer life like? What are the questions that you go to bed with that are hard for you to resolve, right? And let's start to talk about those questions and how we can come together around that in common ministry.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Can I ask, what time is it right now?
4:00.
We have time for a question. We have 5 minutes left. So, Kimberly.
Hello, my name is Kimberly, and I'm a member of the Episcopal Church in Almaden. In today's very subversive gospel, we have Jesus gathering his disciples and asking Peter to feed my sheep. How will you help us feed our sheep in the gospel and the feast of love?
So how would I encourage you to feed your sheep? Well, I would want to do that by sharing myself and my story most directly, I would say. I think in our diocese, we are, and just like in our areas, we can live siloed lives, right? We can live in isolation with each other. Same things that happen when we're in trouble. We want to isolate ourselves. what does it mean for us to come together as congregations so that we can listen and learn from each other and learn from what the Spirit is doing in our midst? So when I was the chair of the Stewardship Commission and bringing that back into life for our diocese, working with people, one of the things that we did was we created a listening tour. So we paired up congregations and we said, we want you to learn from one another about how you're doing stewardship in your own community. What are the problems that you're coming into? What gives you life? Here are some examples of what a healthy stewardship program looks like. And they began to find out that they're not alone. They're not alone in the struggles of what they're doing. They're not alone in the pressures that they're feeling. And they found encouragement in the hard work of doing stewardship in their local context. So I think relationship is a lot of what we find ourselves missing. So let me just go off script a little bit about feeding, because I think vision also feeds us. And I like to say I'm a visionary person. So let me drop one in your lap for a second. People talk about, in Silicon Valley, they talk about what's the next wave of innovation, right? Wall Street's betting on this. Everyone's trying to figure out what the next wave of innovation is. What I wonder is, what if the next wave of innovation is community? What if the next wave of innovation is community? And what if the catalyst for that next wave of community is the church? Here we live in one of the lowest places of social capital, that stickiness that holds us together. Wouldn't it be just like God to create the next wave of innovation in a place where we really struggle with community, right? Think of the impact that would have on the antisocial behavior of today. Aetna Health Services did a survey that said 47 to 48% of Americans struggle with loneliness, right? Think, what would it do to the wealth, the income inequality going on in our local communities? Because income inequality touches on things like gender, ethnic background, race. I mean, it touches on all the things that the church is struggling with or wants to deal with. What if the next wave of innovation was community and that we felt together called to live into that vision and that ministry? So one of the ways in which I would want to feed us is to say, what's that vision that God is calling us into that really is going to be the catalyst to change the world in which we're now living in?
Thank you. Thank you very much.